Okay, grade 8, this is your 10.1 formative quiz. There are a few questions here, so pay attention as we go through it. Any questions you have trouble with, just fast forward to those parts if you want. And if you have any other questions, make sure you ask me tomorrow. The first question says to isolate the variable in the equation negative 2x equals negative 10, you should multiply both sides by negative 2. The answer is false. When you have negative 2x equals negative 10, you need to apply opposite operation. Since this expression means negative 2 multiplied by x, you need to do the opposite. And the opposite of that is division. So therefore, you must divide both sides by negative 2. And the answer would be x equals a positive 5. Because a negative divided by negative is a positive. In the second question, the value of x in the equation negative 5x equals negative 10 will be a negative value. The answer is false, and the reason why is whatever number goes in that bracket where the variable is, I know that it has to be a positive value. And the reason why I know that, so I know it's going to be positive because my integer rule says a negative multiplied by a positive gives me a negative. I don't care what the value of the x is, I just know it has to be a positive value, so the answer is false. In the third question, the operation required to isolate the variable in a quarter of x equals negative 2 is multiplication. Now in the other class, when I gave this question, I said, what is the coefficient? A lot of people thought the coefficient was 4. But the actual answer is the coefficient in this expression is really a quarter, because this is a quarter of x or a quarter of x. So it's not 4, it's actually 0.25. So not that that's relevant to this particular question. What this really has to be interpreted as x divided by 4. That's what this means as well. And if that's true, then the opposite operation is to multiply by 4. And therefore, I will multiply both sides by 4, which makes this true. In 4, it says the value of x in the equation a quarter of x equals 3 will be less than 4. Well, if it was 4, I know that 4 divided by 4 is 1. And if I make this value 8, 8 divided by 4 is 2. So right there, just by that pattern alone, I know my answer is going to be greater than 4, which makes this false. The actual answer for x by inspection will be 12. 12 divided by 4 is 3. In the fifth question, it says the coefficient, which is the one I just talked about in question 3, the coefficient in this particular equation is 4, is false. The coefficient is really a quarter, or a quarter of x, or a quarter times x. In question 6, negative x plus 1 equals 3, the coefficient is negative 1. That is true. It is negative 1. And it's best exemplified if I gave you the expression x and asked you what is the coefficient, you would tell me 1. And we would never write a 1x because it's unnecessary. We know there's just one of them. If there's two of them, that's when I need to write a 2. But in the case where it's negative, what we really want to think of that as being a negative 1x. But you'll always write it as negative x. Okay. In question 7, it says model and use opposite operation. So 4x would be modeled with 4x tiles. 16 would be modeled with 16 of those. And if 4x has a weight or a value of 16, then if I divide those x's into 4 smaller scales and put them all on there, each of those scales would have 4, and therefore x would have a weight or a value of positive 4. Using opposite operation, I would divide both sides by 4, and I'd have x equals 4. In question 8, for those of you who think in question 8, it says solve by inspection and opposite operation. So by inspection, really what you want to do is you want to write down what question you would ask to solve it. And this is actually what number, represented by the number I don't know, divided by negative 5 is, which is really an equal sign, negative 1 question mark. So what number divided by negative 5 is negative 1? Well, I know that it has to be 5 because 5 divided by 5, or a number divided by itself, is 1. The real question is it positive 1 or positive 5 or negative 5? And a positive divided by a negative would give me a negative quotient. So therefore, I know my answer has to be a positive 5. Positive 5 divided by negative 5 is negative 1. In the next one, solve by inspection. So negative 10x equals negative 10. And really, this one's quite easy. So by inspection, the question you're going to ask yourself is negative 10 times what number, or what number times 10, negative 10, is negative 10. And that's really just a basic grade 4 question when we learned multiplication by 1. Any number times 1 is itself, so therefore x must be 1, because negative 10 times 1 would be itself, negative 10. When I use opposite operation, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 10 to create that zero opposite operation, and negative 10 divided by itself is positive 1. Question 10 says solve by modeling. In order to solve this by modeling, I need to be able to interpret it as a quarter of x is negative 2. So if I see it as being a quarter of x, then when I draw my x value, I'm going to shade in just a quarter of it, not all of it. And I'm going to put negative 2 over here. I don't want to know what a quarter of x is, I want to know what all of x is. So I'm going to quadruple both sides. And by quadrupling this side, in order for this to maintain balance or equality, I must quadruple the other side. And when I reimagine my picture, it's going to be a full x is equal to 8 negatives, or x equals negative 8. If I used opposite operation, I would multiply both sides by 4, and I would get x equals negative 8. And if I was to solve by inspection, a quarter of what number is negative 2? A quarter of negative 8 would be negative 2. Okay. Question 11 says solve using inspection and opposite operation. So 3 equals negative 2 multiplied by x. This is not easy using inspection because you have to know that 2 times what. So if I was asking myself the question, I'd say 2 times what, or negative 2 times what, is 3. And the answer to that is a little hard. So 2 times 1.5 is 3, or 1.5. And it would have to be a negative, because a negative multiplied by a negative is a positive. So I know that it has to be negative 1.5. Using opposite operation, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. And I'm going to get x equals, oh, that's not an equal sign. X equals 3 divided by negative 2, which is negative 1.5. Question 12, I'm just going to solve by opposite operation because I'm getting too lazy now. So it says 6 equals what number divided by negative 1? In order to isolate, I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 1. And I'm going to x equals the product of 6 and negative 1, which is negative 6. Question 13 we're going to skip. I rewrote it wrong, so I'm not going to bother with it. But question 14 we are going to do. It says Will's car could travel 8 kilometers on, it should say 1 liter of gas here. 1 liter of gas. How many liters of gas will it take to travel 440 kilometers to Edmundston, New Brunswick? So the first thing it says to do is define your variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to make x equal, and usually, whatever the question is, that's really what your variable is. Because if you don't know a number, you're usually going to solve for it, and that's going to be your solution to the question. So x is going to be the number of liters of gas needed, which is needed to go to Edmundston, but needed. Okay. So the first thing I did was to define my variable. Now the next thing, which is the harder part, is I have to create an appropriate equation. So for every liter of gas, that's represented by x, if I multiply that by 8, that will tell me how far I can go. So for example, on 1 liter of gas, I could travel 8 kilometers. If it was 10 liters of gas, I could travel 80 kilometers, and so on and so forth. So the expression 8 times x really represented how far I can go. Now that has to equal the distance from here to Edmundston, which is 440. So that's the equation that I need to solve for my variable. Once I solve for it, that will be how many liters I need. So I'm just going to isolate by dividing both sides by 8. X will equal 55. And therefore, this is your tag sentence that says use your therefore symbol. Therefore, Will needs 55 liters of gas. Now the bonus says if gas costs, I think it's right here, 116.4 cents, 116.4 cents per liter, how much will it cost to go to Edmundston? Well, the hard part about this is how much money is this? And 116.4 cents is really the same thing as $1.16 and 4/10 of a cent. These two numbers are the exact same thing. Or I could put 1.164, which is 4/10 of a cent. So if I take that dollar amount and multiply it by the number of liters I need, which is 55 liters of gas, I find out I need $64.02. Okay? And that's the answer to the bonus. And the last part is your match. So the -4 in 2x minus 4, this part right here, that's actually called your constant. And your constant is basically the part of your algebraic expression that is not attached to the x. The 2 in 2x minus 4 right there is your coefficient. That's attached to your variable. 2x minus 4 is called an expression because it does not have an equal sign. And 2x minus 4 equals 5 is called an equation because it shows an equality between two amounts. And finally, the x in the equation 2x, or the expression or equation, is called your variable.